Hey, this is Matt, and in this tutorial I'm going to give you a quick overview of MIDI and MIDI loops in Garageband. So we will use a blank document, and this is actually an older version of Garageband. This is the one that's installed in some of the computers in the lab. That'll probably be updated pretty soon. Some of you might have version 10 at home, and I have another quick tutorial on that coming up. So for now, let's go into our database. If you don't see this over on the right hand side, you can go to Control and Show Media Browser. And if you get in here and experiment with some of the loops, hopefully you've gotten in and had a little bit of fun with it already, you'll notice that some of the loops are blue, and depending on what you pick, like a lot of the drum loops are actually these blue icons to the left. Other ones, like these synths, are green icons. And if you scroll down, you'll see the vast majority of these are green. So the blue ones are audio loops, and the green ones are MIDI loops. And they're similar in that they both are flexible, but they're different. Audio loops are actually audio files. They're malleable. MIDI loops are MIDI instructions that trigger sounds, and it's sort of a two-step process. So just a little overview, going back into the olden times. MIDI was a protocol developed back in, I think, 1980. And back then, computers weren't fast enough to create sounds and also arrange them at the same time. So they usually used old computers to do the sequencing, the arranging, and then they would have samplers, external pieces of hardware that would actually play the sounds back. But now we're lucky, and most computers are fast enough to do both at the same time, all within a single DAW, like GarageBand. What is a MIDI loop here? Well, think of it as a piece of music, like the music written on a page, and it doesn't actually represent the sounds. It tells the computer to make sounds like that. So it tells, sort of like the left arm telling the right arm to make the sounds. So the left arm is like the music, the right arm here is the sounds that are created. And I'll explain this a little bit better by getting into a loop, and we'll get into the region and do some editing, and I think it should make a little more sense. So I'm just going to pick a cool one here and drag it and drop. Just a little overview. All GarageBand versions have this little counter on the top in the default blank document. And what are these numbers? 1, 2, 3, 4. Well, these are what they call measures or bars in music. They're synonymous. It is just a measure of time, and in this case, it's a measure of 4 beats, and beats are these little stripes here. So you can see the first measure has 4 beats, as does the second. In fact, all of them do. And this is the default time signature, as they call it. It's called common time because the vast majority of popular music uses this time signature, where they group beats, which are basically just pulses, into groups of 4. And I'll give you a little bit more on that later, but you can see within each loop, it tells you how many beats they are. So you have to do a little math, and by saying, well, a measure is 4, well, this is a 1 measure loop, and sure enough, it fills up 1 measure. And if you scroll down, you can see some have 16 or 32 or 64, and it is no coincidence that they're all multiples of 4. So for example, a 32 beat pattern is a full 8 bars. You can save yourself some time in editing by using these longer phrases. But for now, let's just check this one short little region out. And I'm going to go ahead and turn my metronome off and turn my loop sequence on and resize it. And we'll listen to it. Oh, you know what? Didn't like that one. I think some of these other patterns are better. Dance floor pattern. There we go. This one just moves around a little bit more, so when I change some notes, it'll be a little more obvious. So if I double click on the region, it'll pull up this thing called the piano roll. And I'm going to use my little resizer here to stretch it out so we can see all these cool notes. And watch what happens with when the time marker goes by. And you can see that it actually the computer plays these notes like an old player piano. If you don't know what that is, look it up. There's some great footage out there, even some original recordings of Scott Joplin that predate audio recordings or predate most audio recordings. Okay, so this is a little bit different than audio. In audio region, you'd have to chop it up like you did in Audacity. Well, here we can actually get into the DNA and move these notes around a little bit, which can be all sorts of fun. If you're control freak, it's hours of entertainment. So I'm just going to change a couple notes and see what happens. And I kind of got lucky there, and that they sound good. If you don't know your music theory, you kind of have to do some trial and error. You might drag a note over and land on a dog. They don't all sound good. But where this can be really cool is you can add new notes. So I can hold down Command and paint notes in, and I can resize them from the right-hand side. I can paint all sorts of notes in. Let's see what happens. Just to go really crazy. Yeah, there's some bad sounding notes, but of course I can just undo them. I didn't print it. Let's see. One other thing is when you move these notes around, you'll see that they snap to the grid. And if you want to, and this is kind of looking down the line for the final project, you can actually use some sound effect libraries that trigger MIDI samples. And you can use this piano roll to have dogs bark and do Foley and stuff like that. You might not want to have it snap to grid. Snap to grid's great for music, but you can actually turn snap to grid off. And you'll see when I move it, you can move it in time anywhere. So you can really mess with the feel of a groove if you want to get really nitpicky. You don't have to do that for this project, but let's go back and turn that back on. Snap to grid, Command G. Okay, so that's one way that can be really powerful. And this is cool because you can make these antecedent consequent phrases really quickly by dragging and option dragging a region over. And then you can go over to the new region and just change the ending. You can really just drag a note down like that and maybe drag one over like this. And then let's just listen to this. I've created a longer idea of music with an antecedent consequent phrase that are essentially the same. The ending of the second one is altered. So not great, but note sounds bad. Move it a click up or a click down, and the odds are that it's going to sound better. So the other thing that is really cool about this is I'm going to hide that. You can change the sounds, which is something you couldn't do with the audio. And let's see, this is like a synth sound. If I double click on this track here, it'll pull up my track parameters. And that was a synth. But let's say I want to do like a woodwind. Maybe I want I don't know. What is this? A flute. So I can select this. Let's hear what a flute sounds like. That's kind of cool. How about a clarinet? What's the difference between a flute and a clarinet? Well, kind of cool. Arctic wind. I have no idea what that is. Really kind of crazy stuff. But there are all sorts of string sounds. So you can hear an Irish fiddle. Some of the samples are better than others, but the hours of entertainment with this kind of stuff. And also looking towards the final project, you can do stuff with, Foley and sound effects like applause and laughter. Or comedy noises, that might work better. Oh, here's why this didn't sound good. Whoops. If I go into the track, I'm going to select all of them. So let's see. And I need to drag them out so they are longer. There we go. Yeah, crazy stuff. But you can hear what the sounds are by running up and down the keyboard. So that's a rabbit hole that you can fall into for the final project if you choose to use GarageBand for it. But I think that is pretty much a pretty quick and dirty intro into fun with MIDI in GarageBand. So have fun with your loops. See you soon.